There are people who walk into a room and fill it, not with noise, not with performance, just with presence. The kind that rearranges the air around them, that makes the space feel different after they've passed through it. Most people go their whole lives never meeting someone like that. Fatima Hassan had that gift. And the cruel, beautiful truth was, she had absolutely no idea. There are certain kinds of love that don't begin with warmth. They begin with something colder, a calculation, a decision made in a boardroom or a quiet office at 6 in the morning, with the curtains still drawn and the city still gray, and the heart still convinced that it is made of something harder than it actually is. This is a story about that kind of beginning, and about what happened when the plan met the person, and the person turned out to be entirely, devastatingly human. 7:52 a.m., London, February. The kind of February that sits on your chest. The sky the color of old concrete. The streets still wet from a rain that had given up somewhere around dawn. The whole city exhaling visible breath into the cold, as if it too was trying to remember why it had gotten out of bed. Fatima Hassan was already late. Not catastrophically, not call-ahead late. Just that particular flavor of late that announces itself through small, compounding chaos. The coat that wouldn't cooperate. The bag that wanted to be everywhere at once. The travel cup of tea wedged under her chin because both hands were occupied with the Renault translation files she had absolutely meant to organize the night before. She had not organized them the night before. She'd been reading. A novel she'd picked up on her lunch break 3 days ago and had been unable to put down since. The kind of book that colonizes the edges of your attention, that follows you into the shower, that makes you read one more page until it's midnight and your alarm is 6 hours away, and you have no regrets at all. "Someone has to believe it still exists," she'd said once, when her colleague Priya caught her reading at her desk, spine cracked, cover creased with use. "Believe what?" Priya had asked. "The kind of love that gets all the way in." She pushed through the revolving glass door of the Meridian Communications lobby, coat losing the battle with her shoulder, files threatening full revolt, travel cup somehow surviving. And the security guard at the front desk looked up from his screen with the patience of a man who had seen this particular arrival before. "Morning, Fatima." "Marcus." She kissed 2 fingers in his direction without breaking stride. "What time is it?" 7:53. "I heard nothing." He smiled. She was already at the lifts. Here is what you needed to know about Fatima Hassan in the 60 seconds it takes a lift to travel from the ground floor to the 7th. She was 32 years old, head translator at Meridian, the youngest in the company's history, a fact her manager mentioned to clients with visible pride, and Fatima received with a discomfort she had never quite found the right language to explain. She spoke 6 languages with the ease of someone raised between worlds: Arabic from her mother, French from her grandmother, English from the city that had shaped her, and 3 others she'd collected with the quiet intentionality of someone who understood that language was armor, that knowing how to say, "I belong here," in 6 tongues was its own kind of survival. Her desk was covered in sticky notes, small phrases in 7 languages, lines she'd translated that stayed with her afterward, that she needed to keep somewhere outside her own head. Her colleagues called it chaos. She called it her second mind. She had a small crescent scar near her left eyebrow from a bicycle fall at 9 years old. She touched it when she was nervous, a habit so deeply embedded it had become involuntary. Her own private signal. A body remembering what the mind tried to move past. She was warm in the way that costs something. The kind of warm that draws people in without trying. that makes strangers tell her things on trains, that fills a room not with noise, but with a specific quality of attention. The feeling of being genuinely seen. Some people are born with that. Fatima had always thought of it as both her greatest gift and her most consistent vulnerability. What she carried quietly, what she didn't give to the noise of the office or the warmth of lunch conversations with Priya, was grief. Her mother had died 14 months ago. Softly, as she had done everything, without fuss, in the early hours, her daughter's hands in hers. And Fatima had gone back to work the following Monday, because stillness, she'd found, was more dangerous than motion. She had been moving ever since, filling silence with words, doing what she'd always done, except now the silence was enormously larger, and the words never quite reached the edges of it. And there was one other thing. One thing she touched even less than the scar near her eyebrow. She had been engaged for 11 months. To a man named David, who was patient and reasonable, and fundamentally ill-equipped for the particular experience of being loved by Fatima Hassan. He had ended it with 6 words that had never fully left her body. "You're just too much, Fatih. Too much." As if love were a dial to be turned down. As if the fullness of a person were a problem to be managed. She had not been in a relationship since. Most days, she told herself she was fine with that. Today was not most days. She didn't know that yet. The lift opened on the 7th floor. Fatima stepped out into the corridor, immediately resuming the internal negotiation she'd been having with the Renault files since the lobby. The 9 o'clock meeting with the Paris client was in conference room 7B today. A change from the original 9-floor booking on account of a broken projector, as communicated in a group email she had read at 6 a.m., and immediately forgotten in the way you forget things you were only half present for. She needed the conference room. But she also needed coffee first. Real coffee. There was an Italian machine on the 7 corridor. A beautiful, unreasonably good Italian machine that had arrived 3 years ago for the executive floor and had never been moved when the executives relocated upstairs, and which Fatima had been quietly devoted to ever since. It was, she firmly believed, one of the better things about working at Meridian. She turned left. Files under one arm, travel cup in the other, already composing a mental correction email to a client who had used the French word belle in a context that was going to cause a very specific diplomatic incident, and pushed open the door she was almost entirely certain led to the break room. It did not lead to the break room. Later, she would try to reconstruct it in the right order. The space first. Enormous, clean-lined. The kind of office that doesn't announce itself, but simply is, the way certain authority doesn't announce itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows along the far wall. The whole flat gray London morning spread out beyond them like a painting commissioned by someone who preferred their emotions managed. A desk, dark walnut, nearly bare. A laptop, a glass of water. A notepad with 3 lines of handwriting so controlled it looked like it had been measured. Then the man. He was standing. She registered this before she registered anything else. The fact that he was on his feet, one hand flat on the surface of the desk, the other holding a phone to his ear. Dark suit. No tie. The top button of his shirt undone, which read not as casual, but as the single deliberate concession of someone who'd made every other decision already. Tall. Not the performed kind of tall, the structural kind. Like height was load-bearing, like it was necessary to hold everything else up. His eyes found her the moment the door opened. Dark, nearly black. Eyes that didn't move around a room. They arrived at things. At her. On her face, they landed and stayed, with a quality of attention that was not invasive and was not warm, and was something else entirely that she didn't have a word for in any of her 6 languages. He didn't look surprised. He looked at her the way you look at something you have already, in some private, prior version of this moment, accounted for. Into the phone, without releasing her from that gaze, he said, "I'll call you back." He set the phone on the desk. The silence was immediate and total. Fatima's mind was doing several things at once. It was cataloging the space and the desk and the handwriting and the particular quality of a man who occupied a room without appearing to try. And it was also running, in the background, a very urgent process titled, "This is not the break room, and how do I leave this situation with at least partial dignity?" Her mouth, characteristically, acted before the process completed. "I'm looking for the coffee machine," she said. He said nothing. "The Italian one." She gestured, with the hand holding the travel cup, in the general direction of where the break room ought, theoretically, to have been. "I thought it was... I must have..." The gesture continued, vaguely, completing a sentence her words had abandoned. He looked at the gesture, at the travel cup, at the files stacked under her arm, at the coat still partially surrendered from her shoulder, then back at her face. "The break room," he said, "is the 3rd door on the left." His voice was low, precisely level, the kind of voice that had learned, somewhere and at some cost, to carry no more inflection than the information required. "Right," she nodded. "3rd on the left. I'll just..." One of the Renault files left. It hit the floor with an enthusiasm entirely disproportionate to its content. And 43 pages. She knew it was 43. She had translated every one. Spread themselves across the dark hardwood with the energy of something finally free. The silence that followed was specific and terrible. He stood on his side of the desk. She stood on hers. Then she crouched, set the travel cup on the floor, began gathering pages with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had made peace with the universe's tendency toward inconvenient timing. "How many pages?" She looked up. He was still standing, watching her, still with that expression that gave nothing and took everything in. 43, she said. Something shifted in his face. Fractional. The micro-adjustment of a person who has just received data that didn't fit their existing model. "You know exactly how many." "I translated the document." She tapped the edges of a recovered stack into alignment. "Renault brand guidelines, French to English, 4 regional markets. 43 pages, 2 appendices." A beat. "The appendices are still in my bag, so technically 51, but I only dropped the 43. He was quiet for a moment. She became aware, in the quality of that silence, of the exact distance between them. She was crouched. He was standing. She was looking up at him from the floor of his office in the early morning, with London spread out behind him like a backdrop, and the light from the windows falling across the line of his jaw. And her brain, which was normally in the business of language and translation and the precise movement of meaning between one world and another, produced absolutely nothing useful. Inconveniently striking, it managed, finally. Noted. Moving on. "Let me..." She stopped. Because what she'd started to say was, "Let me help." And she was the one on the floor with the scattered pages. Which meant either she'd had a linguistic malfunction or some part of her had produced an offer for reasons that had nothing to do with the files. He waited. Get these, she finished. She stood, straightened her coat, tucked the files back under her arm with a composure that cost more than it looked. Thank you, she said, and meant it. For the directions. He nodded. Once. The way people nod when they've decided something. She walked to the door, unhurried, purposeful. The specific gait of a person who is choosing not to communicate how much they want to be out of a room. Then she stopped. She didn't plan to stop. Something, instinct, or the particular atmospheric quality of the silence behind her, or some frequency she was receiving without knowing how, turned her back toward the room. He had returned to the desk. He was standing over the notepad, and she could see now that he was reading the 3 lines he'd written. Not the way you read for information, but the way you read something you have committed to memory and return to anyway. Like an anchor, like a reminder, like something that has to be checked before you trust the day to hold. His hand, the one resting flat on the desk, was pressed down with slightly more pressure than resting required. As if he needed the surface. As if, beneath all that stillness, something inside him was working very hard to remain exactly where it was. She looked away before he could feel her looking. "Third on the left," she said quietly, to the doorframe. "Third on the left," he confirmed. He did not turn around. She left. She found the break room. She made the coffee. She stood at the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass and held the cold of it there and thought about nothing, with the focused, deliberate quality of a person who has identified a thought they are choosing not to have. 11 minutes later, passing Marcus at the front desk on the way to the conference room, she stopped. "Marcus." She kept her voice casual. A translation skill that, keeping your voice in one register while the rest of you was in another. "Who's in the corner office on 7? It was dark last week." Marcus looked up. "Jackson Hale," he said. "He owns the company, love." She absorbed this. "He's been gone 3 years," Marcus continued, watching her with the gentle perceptiveness of a man who had worked front desks long enough to read people. "Came back this morning. Apparently almost no one knew he was coming." He paused. "Came in at 6. Hasn't left the 7th floor since." Fatima looked at the lift doors. She thought about a man who pressed his hand against a desk as if the solid surface was the only thing keeping him in place. She thought about 3 lines of handwriting so controlled it looked engineered. She thought about eyes that landed on things with the quality of a decision already made, and the specific, unsettling intuition that she was possibly not the first thing this morning he'd looked at that way. She thought about a voice that gave you exactly what was necessary and nothing more, and the private certainty, the translator's instinct, the one that had never failed her, that what it was most carefully withholding was something it had been withholding for a very long time. She touched the scar near her eyebrow. "Third on the left," she thought. "You translated 43 pages on his floor, and now you're standing in the lobby thinking about him. Get it together." She went to her meeting. On the 7th floor, in the corner office that belonged to him and had been waiting for him for 3 years, Jackson Hale sat down. For the first time since arriving at 6 a.m., he sat. He looked at the notepad. At the 3 lines. One day at a time. The work is what matters. Don't let it in. Then he opened the folder on his desk, the one his solicitor had sent over 2 weeks ago, the one that had triggered his return to London after 3 years of deliberate distance. He turned to the page he'd already read 6 times. The organizational chart, the department listings, the names. His finger moved down the column. Stopped. Fatima Hassan, head translator, Meridian Communications. Youngest appointment in company history. He looked at the name for a long moment. Then he looked at the floor, at the exact spot where 43 pages had scattered across the dark hardwood 40 minutes ago. At the spot where she had crouched, unhurried, and tapped the edges of the pages straight with the automatic precision of someone completely unbothered by her own disorder. He closed the folder. He pressed his fingers together on the desk in front of him and stayed very still. The way he stayed still when something had moved through him that he hadn't prepared for. The way he stayed still when a calculation had just become significantly more complicated than it was supposed to be. He had come back to London for a reason. He had a plan. He had always had a plan. Plans were the thing he was best at, the clean, architectural logic of them, the way a well-built strategy could take something messy and make it manageable, take something out of control and give it back to you in a form you could hold. The plan had not included her being like that. It had not included 43 pages of Renault brand guidelines. It had not included a woman who looked up from the floor of his office and told him, without flinching, that she knew exactly how many pages she had dropped. It had not included the particular quality of her stopping at the door, or the way he'd noticed. He picked up the phone, dialed his solicitor. "Fallon," he said. "The restructure. I want the translation department moved." A pause. "Moved where, Mr. Hale?" He looked out at the London sky. Gray. Unreadable. The color of a decision you know you're going to make before you've made it. "The 7th floor," he said. "Effective next week." He ended the call. He looked at the notepad. "Don't let it in." He left the line there. He always left it there. He told himself, as he had told himself every morning for 3 years, that he was in control of this. He was always in control of this. The email arrived on Friday at 4:47 p.m., which was, Fatima would later note, a very specific time to send an email of this nature. Late enough that the working day was functionally over. Early enough that it couldn't be called out of hours. The precise slot of time that belonged to decisions someone wanted absorbed quietly, without room for immediate response. She was still at her desk when it landed. She almost missed it. She was in the middle of correcting a Danish to English translation that had made a very unfortunate error with the word fart, which means speed in Danish, and does not mean that in English. And the correction required her full attention and a level of professional seriousness she was barely maintaining. Her screen pinged. She glanced at it, read it once, read it again. "Priya," she said without raising her voice. Priya Mehta, 29, assistant translator, possessor of the sharpest peripheral awareness in the building, looked up from her own desk. "What?" Fatima turned her screen around. Priya read it. Her expression moved through several stages. "Is this?" "Effective Monday," Fatima confirmed. "The entire translation department. 7th floor." "But we're on 9. "We were on 9. "But our things are on 9. "Our things," Fatima said, with the specific calm of a person who had already used up their immediate reaction and was now operating in the cooler territory beyond it, "will apparently be on 7 as of 8 a.m. Monday morning, per the relocation brief attached to this email, which was sent by," she looked at the sender field, though she already knew, "Jackson Hale, CEO." Priya looked at the sender name, then at Fatima, then back at the screen. "Isn't that the man who—" "I walked into his office on Wednesday, yes." "Because you were looking for the coffee machine." "Which is also on the 7th floor," Fatima said. So at least that's resolved. She turned her screen back around. She looked at the email for a long moment. At the clean, architectural language of it. No preamble, no explanation, no softening phrase. Just the decision and its implementation, presented as a fact, the same way weather was a fact. It had been decided. Here were the logistics. Here was the date. Here was the name at the bottom. She touched the scar near her eyebrow. Then she opened a new email, typed, "Thank you for the advance notice" in the body, addressed it to Jackson Hale, and stared at it for 45 seconds before deleting it without sending. "Right," she said, and went back to the Danish translation. Fart, she thought, meant speed. Sometimes things meant something different than they appeared to. Monday arrived with the particular energy of a thing that has been decided, regardless of your feelings about it. Fatima arrived at 7:45, early, which was its own kind of statement, though she hadn't consciously intended it that way. She told herself it was practical. She told herself she wanted to settle the department before the day began, wanted to see the space and understand it before she had to navigate it in front of her team. She told herself it had nothing to do with a man who'd pressed his hand flat against a desk and looked at her like a problem he'd already solved. The 7th floor was different in the morning light. She hadn't been here long enough on Wednesday to take it in properly. She'd been too busy committing the specific shame of dropping 43 pages on someone's office floor. But now, walking the corridor with her bag and her travel cup, and the small collection of desk items she'd carried down from 9 in a box, she noticed things. It was quieter than 9, more deliberate. The kind of quiet that wasn't absence of noise, but intentional management of it. The carpet slightly thicker, the overhead lights set at a lower temperature. The whole floor operating at a frequency that was considered and controlled, and not at all like the organized, productive chaos of the floor she'd left. This is going to be interesting, she thought. She found the translation department's new space. 4 desks arranged along the east wall, which was also glass. A view of the gray London morning, the Thames visible in the distance if you stood at the right angle. She stood at the right angle immediately, travel cup in hand, and thought that it was actually rather beautiful. She was thinking this when she heard footsteps. Measured, even. The footsteps of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had always known. She turned around. Jackson Hale stood in the doorway of the translation space. Dark suit, no tie again, or perhaps he never wore one, she didn't have enough data yet. He was holding a coffee, which struck her as unexpectedly human, and he was looking at her with that same quality of attention that she had spent the weekend decidedly not thinking about. "Ms. Hassan," he said. "Mr. Hale," she said. A beat. The city spread out behind her through the glass. "The space suits the department," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't offered as conversation. It was stated, flatly, as a thing he had determined. "The view is better," she said. "The light is better." She paused. The reasoning would also be better if someone had shared it. Something moved through his expression, so brief she might have imagined it. Then it was gone. The restructure required consolidating certain departments on operational floors, he said. 7 is the operational center. 9 has been the translation department's home for 11 years. 9 is being repurposed. 4? Expansion of client relations. She looked at him steadily. He looked back at her the same way. 2 people in a doorway with coffee, having the world's most controlled argument. "I'd have appreciated the conversation before the email," she said.
Not hostile, just honest.
In the way she was always honest, with the particular directness of someone who believed that plainness was a form of respect. The decision was made at the end of business Thursday. The email arrived at 4:47 Friday. That is the end of business Thursday, Miss Hassan. That, she said, depends entirely on whose business. The silence between them had a texture. She could feel it, the precise resistance of a person who was not accustomed to being pushed back at and was deciding in real time how to respond. He did not respond. Instead, he looked past her, at the desks, at the view, at the small box of her desk items sitting on the nearest surface, the sticky notes in 7 languages, the cracked spine novel she'd brought down on instinct, the small framed photograph she kept at her workspace, which was her and her mother on a beach in Agadir, both of them laughing at something the camera had missed. His gaze moved across these things with an attention so careful and so brief that she almost didn't catch it. Almost. Your team arrives at 9, he said. 8:30, she corrected. We have the Paris follow-up. Another fractional pause. The conference room on 7B is booked from 8:30. I know, she said. I booked it. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Good morning, Miss Hassan, he said, and walked away. She turned back to the view, to the gray city and the distant silver thread of the Thames. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, cool and solid, exactly like the break room window 3 floors up, and she breathed out slowly through her nose. Good morning, she said to the glass. She set up her desk. She arranged the sticky notes. She placed her mother's photograph where the morning light would catch it. She put the novel in the drawer and then took it out again because she was not hiding the novel. She had never hidden the novel, and she was not starting now. She was doing this, placing the last sticky note, a line in Arabic that her mother used to say, "The heart knows what the eyes haven't seen yet," when she noticed the coffee. Not her coffee. Her travel cup was on the desk where she'd set it. This was a second cup. A proper cup, white ceramic, sitting at the edge of her new desk as if it had always been there. The coffee inside was still steaming. Flat white, she could tell from the color, the precise ratio of espresso to milk. She looked at the door. The corridor outside was empty. She looked back at the cup. She picked it up, took a sip. It was perfect. Exact temperature, exact strength. The Italian machine, from the break room on this floor. 3rd door on the left. Her chest did something she elected to ignore. She took another sip, put the cup down, and opened her laptop. She had work to do. She had a great deal of work to do. She absolutely, definitively did not spend any portion of the next 30 minutes thinking about who had left it there. The coffee cup, steaming, sitting on her desk. He's already watching. She doesn't know. Her team arrived at 8:30 with varying degrees of enthusiasm for the relocation. Priya arrived first, looked at the view, said, "Actually, this is nicer," and immediately began rearranging her desk. Tomas, the Spanish and Portuguese lead, arrived with a box of his desk plants and spent 15 minutes finding the best light for each of them by the window. Ren, who handled all of the East Asian markets and spoke 4 languages with an elegance that made Fatima quietly envious, simply sat down and began working as if the floor number had never mattered at all. Fatima watched her team settle and felt the particular warmth of that. The way people she cared about adapted, made space livable, turned institutional fluorescence into something resembling a home. The Paris call went well. The Renault brief was well received.
Fatima translated 3 side exchanges in real time from French, while simultaneously managing the English language portion of the meeting, which was a thing she did without comment because it was simply what the job required, and which the client noted afterward as being remarkably fluid in a way that made Priya kick her under the table, because Priya had been saying this for years. It was a good morning on the whole. And then, at 11:15, Jackson Hale walked past the glass wall of the translation space for the 3rd time in an hour. Fatima didn't look up from her screen. She was very focused on not looking up. "He's done that 3 times," Priya said from the desk behind her, at a volume designed to carry only as far as Fatima. "Has he?" "He's not doing anything. He's just walking past." "People walk past things, Priya. It's a corridor." "Fatima, I'm working." He looked in. "This is a glass wall. People look through glass. That's what glass is for." He slowed down. Fatima typed a sentence she would later have to delete because it contained a word she'd invented. "I didn't notice." Priya's silence communicated several things without producing a single sound. "I didn't," Fatima said. "I know," Priya said, in the specific tone of someone who did not know this at all. At 1 p.m., Fatima went to the break room for lunch. She brought her novel. She always brought her novel. She made tea, the good loose leaf she kept in her desk drawer, and she sat at the small table by the window and she read for 40 minutes, and she did not think about anything other than the story in her hands, which was very good and very romantic, and involved a man who was learning, slowly and at great personal cost, how to be known by someone. She was 3 pages from the end of a chapter she hadn't been able to get to all morning, when someone sat down across from her. She looked up. Jackson Hale set a sandwich on the table, one for himself, opened his laptop, and began reading something with the focused attention of a man who had decided this was where he was going to eat lunch, and had not considered that anyone might have an opinion about it. Fatima looked at him. He did not look up. She looked back at her book. The break room was small. There were 4 tables. He had sat at hers. She read the same paragraph 3 times without retaining a single word. "The break room has 4 tables," she said finally. He turned a page on his laptop screen. "It does." "3 of them are unoccupied." "Noted." She looked at the top of his head. Dark hair, slightly too long at the back in a way that was either deliberate or the result of someone who had been somewhere without access to a decent barber. She looked at the line of his jaw and the way he held his coffee cup. Loosely, the way people hold things they're not paying conscious attention to. "Is there a reason," she said, "that you chose this one?" He looked up, directly at her. The dark eyes, unhurried. "The window," he said. "Better light for reading." She looked at the window. The gray London afternoon leaned against it. "It's February," she said. "There is no light." "There's more light here than at the other 3 tables," he said, and went back to his screen. She stared at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her novel. She found her page. She read, actually read this time, the words landing and sticking and carrying her into the story the way they always did when she surrendered to them. She was 4 pages in when she became aware that he had stopped typing. She didn't look up. She turned a page. She absolutely did not notice that the not typing had lasted longer than a natural pause, that the quality of the silence had shifted from occupied to something else, that if she were to look up,
She would likely find him looking at her. She did not look up. She finished her chapter. She closed the book. She stood, gathered her things, and said,
without looking at him, "The window on the north wall has better light. In February." She left. She was at the door when she heard, behind her, the quiet sound of a chair scraping back and relocating. She did not smile. She was very serious about not smiling. She smiled in the corridor where no one could see it. By the end of the first full week, Fatima had mapped the 7th floor the way she mapped every new territory, through its rhythms, its sounds, its specific human geography. She learned that Jackson Hale arrived at 6 every morning and did not take calls before 8, which meant the hour between those two things was when the floor was still and she could hear, if she arrived early enough, the quiet, deliberate sounds of a man working in a way that required complete silence. No music, no murmuring of a television in the background. Just keys. Occasionally, the low, controlled cadence of his voice on a call, conducted with a compression of language that made her translator's instincts lean forward. Every word load-bearing, nothing decorative. Nothing given that wasn't specifically required. She learned that he took his coffee black until 11, then switched to water. She learned this because the break room was 11 steps from her desk, and she was there more often than strictly necessary, a fact she attributed entirely to the quality of the Italian machine and to no other factor. She learned that he walked the floor at 11:15, 1:30, and 4. 3 times a day, the same route, past the finance cluster, down toward the conference rooms, past the glass wall of the translation space. The walk of someone assessing, accounting for. She learned, at the end of the first week, that he always slowed fractionally when he passed the translation space. She discovered this by accident. She was standing at the glass wall herself. She'd been showing Ren a printout, using the glass as a vertical surface to lay it flat against, and she caught the reflection of him in the corridor behind her. The slowing, the specific quality of a glance that lasted half a second longer than a glance needed to. She did not turn around. She waited until she heard his footsteps continue past, and then she went back to her desk and opened the Renault file and stared at a paragraph about brand consistency across regional markets for approximately 4 minutes without reading a single word. He's the CEO, she told herself. He walks the floor. He looks at things. You work for him. This is what management looks like. Her brain produced this explanation with the eager helpfulness of a person who is covering something up. She accepted it anyway, because the alternative required thinking about things she had specifically decided not to think about, and she had a great deal of work to do, and the Paris client had sent a question about subjunctive mood in French that required her full attention. She focused on the subjunctive. The subjunctive, at least, made consistent and rational sense. He's watching you, Priya said on Wednesday, without preamble, in the way that Priya delivered certain observations, as if they had been facts for a long time and she was only now filing the paperwork. They were in the break room. Priya had the salad she brought every Wednesday, which she ate with the resigned energy of someone serving a nutritional sentence. Fatima had leftover rice her aunt had sent over the weekend, which smelled extraordinary, and which Priya eyed with the specific suffering of a woman committed to her Wednesday salad. He's not watching me, Fatima said. He's managing the floor. He walked past that glass 4 times yesterday. We counted. We? Tomas and I. Tomas has a tally. He's calling it the Hale Patrol. Fatima pressed her lips together against something. Tell Tomas to delete the tally.
You could tell him yourself, though you'd have to look up from your desk at the right moment, which seems to be something you're actively avoiding. I'm working. Fati. Priya set down her fork. I've worked with you for 4 years. I've seen you translate 3 documents simultaneously while eating a meal and having a phone conversation. You are always working. What you are also currently doing is not looking at the corridor. And those 2 things are different. Fatima ate a forkful of rice. He left you coffee again, Priya said, quieter now, less teasing, more careful. I don't know that it was him. There are 14 people on this floor. Marcus confirmed the others were in a briefing. It was him. Fatima thought about a white ceramic cup, still steaming, at the edge of a desk she hadn't fully settled into yet. She thought about the precision of the temperature, the exact ratio. It's not, she started. I know, Priya said. He probably just, Fati, I know. They ate in silence for a moment. He has a plan, Fatima said suddenly. She hadn't known she was going to say it until it was out. The translator's instinct again, reading the spaces between words, the weight of things not offered. I can feel it. Every time he... She stopped. There's something he's moving toward, something he's managing. She shook her head. I don't know what it is, but it's deliberate. Priya looked at her seriously. Are you worried? Fatima thought about a man who pressed his hand against a desk as if needing it to anchor him. She thought about 3 lines of handwriting that looked engineered. I don't know, she said honestly. She finished her rice. She went back to work. His name, she was learning, was both everywhere and nowhere on the 7th floor. Everywhere in the sense that every decision that came through, the client restructure proposal, the new vendor agreements, the operational calendar, bore his mark in the clean, compressed precision of its language. She could identify his thinking in a document the same way she could identify a translation's original language from the rhythm of the syntax. He left traces. He couldn't help it, the way every mind left traces in the way it ordered things. Nowhere in the sense that he did not socialize. He did not linger in corridors. He did not make small talk in the break room or stop at desks to ask how things were going with the casual warmth of a manager trying to be liked. He was not trying to be liked. That much was clear. He was present, and he was watching, and he was running some kind of interior calculation that he had no intention of sharing with anyone. Which was fine, she told herself. He was the CEO. He was not required to explain himself. He was not required to be warm or accessible or to make her feel like her department's relocation had been anything other than an operational necessity. He was not required to leave her coffee. And yet, the coffee became a thing she did not mention and could not stop noticing. It arrived on the days she was first in, always there when she sat down, always perfect, always in the white ceramic cup that belonged to the break room's matching set. She'd confirmed it was the Italian machine. She'd checked the cup. She'd done everything, basically, except walk to his office and say, "Did you leave me coffee?" Which she was not going to do, because she was a functional adult with professional boundaries and a great deal of dignity. She was also doing something she had not done in a long time. She was looking forward to coming in. Not in the way she used to look forward to coming in, the comfortable pleasure of good work and people she liked. Something else. Something with an edge to it. The particular, slightly unnerving alertness of knowing that a specific thing might happen, without knowing what that thing would be or what form it would take. She recognized the feeling. She recognized it from fiction, from the novels she read with the spines cracked and the pages dog-eared. It was the feeling of a story that had started moving without your permission. She found this equal parts exciting and alarming. Grant Ellis arrived on Thursday. He worked in the corporate legal department, newly transferred from the Edinburgh office, which explained why Fatima hadn't encountered him before. He was tall, sandy-haired, the kind of handsome that was easy and uncomplicated. And he walked into the 7th-floor corridor on Thursday morning like someone who had decided to enjoy being where he was. He found the break room. He found Fatima in it, making tea. He introduced himself with the practiced ease of a person genuinely good at meeting people. "Fatima Hassan," she said, shaking his hand. "Grant Ellis," he smiled. "Legal. Although I hear you're the one they actually need when things get linguistic in the boardroom." "Occasionally," she said. "I heard about the Renault briefing." He leaned against the counter. 3 languages, real time, no notes. That's extraordinary. She made a face. "It's just pattern recognition." "Don't do that," he said. "Don't minimize it." She looked at him, at the easy, direct quality of it.
The simple, uncomplicated warmth of someone who meant what he said without architecture behind it. She thought, this is what straightforward feels like. And then, before she could stop it, she thought, I had forgotten. "Thank you," she said. "That's kind." They talked for 11 minutes. He was funny. Not performed funny, but genuinely funny. The kind of humor that came from observing things accurately. He asked about the translation department, about the move from 9 to 7, whether she liked the new view. She walked back to her desk, feeling lighter than she had in a week. She was 3 steps from her desk when she looked up, by accident, by the specific accident of her peripheral vision doing what it did, whether she wanted it to or not. Jackson Hale was standing at the far end of the corridor. He was not moving. He was not walking past. He was simply standing, and he was looking at the direction of the break room with an expression that was not readable at this distance and in this light, but that had a quality she could feel from where she was. Like something calculating, like something pulled tight. Their eyes met. He looked away first. He walked into his office. The door did not close behind him. It never did, she'd noticed. The door of his office was always precisely, intentionally ajar. But he turned away from the corridor, and she could no longer see his face. She sat down at her desk. She opened the Renault file. She touched the scar near her eyebrow and read the same sentence 4 times before she gave up and admitted to herself that she wasn't going to be able to concentrate for at least the next 10 minutes, which was unprecedented and irritating and not something she had the energy to interrogate right now. She got up and made more tea. She absolutely did not look toward his office on the way. The door always ajar. Friday afternoon, 5:20. The floor was emptying. Fatima was the last of her team to leave, as she almost always was. She worked late, not because she felt she had to, but because the quiet of an emptying office was one of her favorite things. The sound of the floor going still around her while she finished something, the particular quality of late afternoon light going amber and low that made her feel more settled in her own skin. She was finishing a translation brief, a literary contract, a French novelist whose English publisher needed specific clauses assessed for cultural nuance. The kind of work she loved most. The kind that required not just language, but feeling. The sense of what something cost in one tongue and whether the cost survived the crossing into another. She had her headphones in. Something quiet, ambient. She was deep in it.
She did not hear him come to the door. She felt it, the specific shift in the quality of the room that happens when someone enters it, a thing she'd always been sensitive to, the physics of presence. She looked up. Jackson Hale was standing in the doorway of the translation space. No coffee this time, no folder, no professional reason she could identify. He was in his jacket, which meant he was leaving or had been about to. But he was standing in the doorway, and he was looking at her desk with an expression that had slipped, just slightly, from the register she'd come to recognize. Something less controlled in it. Something she didn't have a word for yet. She pulled out one headphone. "Mr. Hale." He looked up from her desk to her face. "You're still here," he said. "I often am." She held up the brief. "Literary contract. The syntax is, there's a clause about creative rights that translates differently in French versus English law, and I want to make sure—" She stopped because she was explaining herself, and she hadn't decided to explain herself, and she wasn't sure why she had started. "Yes, I'm still here." He nodded slowly. The way he nodded when he was processing something rather than agreeing. His gaze moved to her desk, to the sticky notes, to the Arabic line. "The heart knows what the eyes haven't seen yet," in her mother's handwriting, transferred to a sticky note after the funeral. The original page folded in her wallet. "What does that one say?" he said. She looked at the note. The question surprised her. Not the fact of it, but the fact that he'd asked. That he'd identified the Arabic among 6 other languages and asked about that one. "It says—" She paused. She had translated this line privately dozens of times, tried every English equivalent. None of them fully held it. "Roughly, the heart knows what the eyes haven't seen yet." She looked at him. "It doesn't translate perfectly. The closest English feeling would be intuition, but with more faith in it." He was quiet. He looked at the line of Arabic script for a long moment, with an expression she couldn't classify. "My mother used to say it," she said, and then wished she hadn't. She hadn't planned to give him that. He looked at her face. "Used to," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the specific tonal quality of a person who has understood something, who has heard the tense shift and understood what it means without requiring elaboration. She nodded once. Just once. He looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he looked at the floor. Then he said, "Lock up when you leave. The corridor lights go to motion sensor after 6. "I know," she said. "Thank you." He left. She put her headphone back in. She sat for a moment without reading anything, without translating anything, just sitting in the amber quiet of the emptying floor, with the brief in her hands and the Arabic note in her eyeline, and something warm and uncomfortable moving through her chest that she genuinely could not categorize. She went back to work. She stayed another hour. She did not hear whether he stayed, too. She told herself she wasn't listening for it. She was listening for it. There was a file in Jackson Hale's desk drawer. Not on his laptop, not in the cloud. A physical file. Paper, printed, the corners already softened from handling, that he had been carrying with him for 4 months. The way you carry something you haven't decided whether to use yet. The way you carry something whose weight you've grown so accustomed to that you stop feeling it until you set it down, and suddenly the absence of it is wrong. He opened it on Friday night, after the floor had emptied, after she had gone. He spread the contents across his desk the way he always did when he came back to this. The methodical, architectural laying out of a man who needed to see everything at once in order to think clearly. His sister's HR file. The disciplinary record that had never made it past a single internal review. The emails. 6 of them, printed, the language in them careful enough to be deniable and specific enough to make clear what had happened.